Hello, this is Ryan Eller again, the MIST Program Coordinator at Cal State Monterey Bay for the Masters of Instructional Science and Technology program. And this is the continuation of the video guide through the application. And we will begin now working on Quadrant 1, or the personal information quadrant. But very briefly before we do that, just a small thing to add before we begin, a very useful link for those both applying to the MIST program and those choosing to apply to the MIST program after maybe applying to another program is the Add Program button up here. If you click on that, it will open up the ability to add an additional university's application and an additional university's program. Now, of course, you would have to pay a separate application fee for that. But the nifty thing about that is if you do find our program after, say, applying to a different program and maybe goals change, you can click on that and the first two sections of your application will auto-populate, which is a really, really nifty thing to do. So something worth exploring if you are applying to our program after applying to a previous CSU. So with that in mind, we'll jump into the personal information tab. I pre-filled it just so I could see it before I spoke with you all, but there's 7 sections and we'll just work through each one. The first one being a very simple and easy release statement. You're basically just going to certify that the application information that you share is truthful. And then secondly, you're going to click and allow us to be able to contact you based on the information that you provide. So just very simple things. You just click yes to both of those, and then you move right on to the next section. From there, it will be biographic information, many of which you've already will have completed by having completed your profile before to even be able to begin an application. So most of this will be pre-filled. There are some small things here that may be a benefit, though, to you as the applicant. The biggest being the alternate and preferred name. In terms of the alternate name, something that may be very, very beneficial for you is if you, for example, as they share here, have a maiden name. And so if you had a previous last name, it's really, especially when it comes to university documents at prior institutions, it's great if you could share it here, because then any information that comes into our university that would fall under, for example, the same social security number, same address, things like that, it's more easy for the admissions department to compare, okay, well, Allison Smith and Allison Sue are the same person. They just had a different last name at any given time, right? So very, very useful to get all of your documents in one place and to keep the admissions cycle nice and speedy on your behalf. The second one being the preferred name. I feel like this is becoming more common of seeing folks who either want to shorten their given name or go by their middle name, things of that nature, and seeing that often and having that be a request after someone's admitted, we can actually kind of take care of this on the front end. And you're able to share, hey, even though my first name is Chris, I prefer to go by my middle name, David, and bam, now your CSUMB email, which would have been before C last name, will now be D representing David last name, and will populate as David and your last name when you're on your our campus learning management system, iLearn, or just even on your Google profile, things of that nature. So it's just a nice little nifty thing to have. Not critical in my case, since I don't go by a different name or I've never had a different last name, I've selected no here. But if either of those apply in their respective categories, you would select yes, and then provide obviously what the name you prefer to be called is. From there, there's some demographic information such as your legal sex. Obviously, you can fill whatever 3 you feel that you are. And then the next 3 questions are not technically required. So in this instance, I'm going to skip them, but if you want to share this information relevant to these 3 questions, please do so. It's not going to be incredibly relevant to us as program reviewers of your application. We're not really going to look at that information too closely, but it is there to provide it should you feel it necessary. Okay, and then from there, you can see I pre-filled my birth information. You obviously can just share your information as you see relevant there. Okay, then we'll jump into the contact information. As I alluded to in the previous video, the contact information to me is super, super critical, because even with your mailing address, this is information we're going to use to communicate with you in some form or fashion. And so for us, for example, we are going to send your program admissions letter to this address, right? And then also on top of that, when you graduate, if you stay at your same address during the duration of the program, this is where your diploma would be sent. So there's some little functional things here that make this information very, very relevant and important to have an actual preferred address versus, let's say, your work address where your job may change over the next 16 months, things of that nature. A nifty feature here is if you do plan on moving within a given frame of time, you can let us know the date that you plan on potentially moving out, and you'll be able to go back in and change that to a new address. Should you still be applying at that time, or after you graduate, we'll kind of know, okay, well, they planned on moving here, so we can kind of on the back end ask for your updated contact information, current address information, that is. Okay. If it's not a permanent address, you'll share what your permanent address might be. And then obviously your phone and email will come directly from the profile information that you had previously shared on your application. Okay, so then you'll continue on to the next section. This is a really important category primarily for tuition purposes and primarily for two different groups of students, well, really three groups of students. Firstly, if you are a US citizen and a resident of California, you will be charged the California resident tuition rate for graduate students, okay? So it's critical that if you fall under that category of being California state resident, that you do reflect it on this part of the application, because the university is going to default to what you provide here. Now, there will be some verification processes that will take place, but by and large, we are going to default to the information that you provide here. So if you accidentally say that you're not, that you don't claim California residency, for example, then the online database that you select your classes within and all of that type of stuff is going to charge you a different rate for tuition. So if you are a California resident, which many of you will be, this is how I would expect this section to look, okay? Naturally, if you are a student from another country coming here on a student visa, you would select differently and provide the country of citizenship that you hold, and then you would be also letting us know, kind of which U.S. state that you may claim residencies. That rarely will be the case for international students to be able to claim a U.S. state for residency. But for those of you who are also out of state, you would let us know what state you're in. Now, there's an important distinction here that I think, even though it's not necessarily related to the application, is related and important to the potential missed student. So if you are an international student or a student from out of state, it may behoove you to potentially select the online program, because that program is charged a flat rate regardless of where you're located, okay? Whereas if you are a student who is based out of California, selecting either one might make sense, but the tuition rate specifically for international students and out-of-state students greatly increases if they are not a California state resident. So that's something to keep in mind. I can't give an exact dollar amount, but it's significantly more than if you were a California state resident. Now, naturally, for the online program, that does not qualify for a student visa. So you would have to select the blended program no matter what, if that was the case for you. But if you're out of state, it really usually is the program that we recommend, is the online program, because it just makes the most sense financially. Okay, so all that good stuff being said, do select obviously the residency requirements that fit your individual case most specifically. Okay, the next section, pretty simple, race and ethnicity, some more demographic information. I personally have selected decline to state for all of these, but you can share the information that you feel comfortable sharing here. Once again, it's not going to be terribly relevant to our admissions purposes at the program level. But it's useful information for the university to have in terms of understanding demographic information. So if you do feel comfortable sharing it, share it. If you don't, you can do what I did here and just click decline to state for all three options, and none of that information would be shared with the university. Okay. And then kind of the last two portions here, both with varying levels of importance. Okay, so the other information has a very critical item to start off with, and that is your social security number. If you are a United States citizen with a social security number, or you have some other residency status that grants you a social security number for that matter, if you have a social security number and you plan on receiving some form of grant, scholarship, or loan package to help fund, or any combination of the three for that matter, any combination there to receive aid to help fund your studies, you will want to provide your social security number now. There's ways to provide it on the back end, but it's a little it's less intuitive. I'll leave it at that. I understand that folks want to protect this information. So I understand the desire to keep your social security number private. But if you share this information, it won't be like, I can't access it at the program level. Only critical university staff members will be able to access your social security number. So it's not shared with everybody, but it is used to help determine things like financial aid and things of that nature. So having it now versus trying to get it into the system later, it's just a lot easier if you can provide it now. So if that's relevant to you, provide that. If you don't have a social security number, naturally you would select no there in that category. Some other minor things here, language proficiency. This is probably most critical to those of you who are international students where English may not be your first language. If it is, you can go ahead and obviously state that it is, but if not, then you provide what your first language is and then add any additional languages. And even if English is your first language, you can provide additional languages here that you may be fluent in. Your military status will carry over from what you completed in your profile selection. And then another important financial question kind of comes into play here, which is the military dependent question. So there are potential education benefits for those who are dependents of veterans. So if you do have that dependent status, you would want to share this here. I don't know enough about those funding programs, to be really frank with you, to tell you how that works. But I do know, once again, similar to your social security number, providing this information accurately now saves you steps that you don't have to go through with the Veteran Student Services Department. So if you can provide that accurate information now, you save yourself a little bit of legwork later. Okay. Now some important academic background information. Most everybody is going to who graduates with a bachelor's degree is going to come in good standing from their previous school. The only area where I see this may impact those is somebody who maybe was in a previous graduate program and didn't necessarily do as well academically as they would have hoped to, and then are now looking for an alternative option to complete their studies. That has happened in the past with students, and it is a viable option to still apply to our program because we will consider your case on an individual basis. But for most of you, we're going to be selecting yes in this category. If you select no, you'll be asked to explain it at a later time in your application, and you can share why you aren't in good standing and why we should consider you. And it isn't a disqualifier automatically. In fact, we've had a few students that come to mind who certainly ended their studies maybe at not the best standing with their prior university, but based on conversations with us and the application materials they provided, we felt confident that they can complete our program well. Okay, so it's not an academic or not necessarily a disqualifier, but this is something that you just want to be truthful for, so that we have a good understanding and you have the best opportunity to explain yourself fully, if that makes sense. From there, similarly, you'll have some academic infractions and conduct issues that may have popped up in your past. If that's the case, you would share what they are. There's 3 categories here: academic performance, so i.e. Overall grade, GPA, academic disqualification, which at our university, for example, graduate students would be disqualified if they stayed under a 3.0 GPA for a given amount of time. That's obviously dependent on your university's policies. And then lastly, if you've ever been disciplined for any student conduct violation by a college or university. Similar to the previous category, if either of those 3 apply, you will select yes and explain what that situation was to the best of your ability. But I'm assuming, once again, for probably about 99.9% of applicants, they're just going to want to select no for all 3 of these. Okay. Next, teacher or other education credential information. Most people here are going to select not interested in a credential program or planning to apply to a credential program at a later time. Okay. I have yet to see a student decide to take a credential and a master's program at the same time at this university. So the likelihood that you'll select option 3 here is probably 0%. But if for whatever reason that applies to you, you would select that option. But most likely you're going to select one of the 2. And it's not critical. Honestly, even if you did plan on applying to a credential program later, you'd still be reapplying. So it doesn't really matter. But it does give our School of Education some background information of potentially reaching out to you when you're getting close to completing your studies in our program. Okay. CalFresh is a potential benefit program that could impact you. So if you are thinking of trying to get some additional aid that kind of expands past your educational needs and more into kind of monthly food needs, things of that nature, you would go ahead and look at the CalFresh program, see if you qualify for it. If you're interested in it, you select yes, and that will be handled by an outside office that will work with you directly, okay, on that front to see if you are eligible for said program. Lastly, RN license, regardless if you have one or not terribly relevant to our program, so selecting yes or no here doesn't matter. If you select yes, you're going to provide information about that license. If you select no, you can just skip that. So I would recommend no in all cases. And then lastly, you're going to have a how did you hear about us section. You can select from the brevity of options here of what that might be that ultimately led you to apply to the program. And then that just helps us in terms of kind of having a statistical idea of who's coming from where. Okay, so naturally then you'll click Save and Continue. And then you'll go to the final section of this quadrant of the application. The first one will be household income. Another one that's pretty important is if you are a dependent or independent student, and that will impact certain financial aid eligibility. To be frank, I'm not somebody who deals with financial aid directly, so how that will impact you, I cannot say. That will be up to the financial aid department. But you do want to see what category you fall under and then pick appropriately. For most students at the graduate level, it's going to be independent, but there is potential that you could fall under dependent status still. Okay, and where this might be really most relevant is for example, children of CSU employees who are going to use their waiver, their parents' waiver, to go through our program for financial purposes. And then if you are independent, you will share your family background information, also your earnings. I made up fake information for this, but you'd want to provide accurate information there, once again, for financial purposes. And then you'll share your parent and graduate education, parent and guardian education level as well. You'll select from the brevity of options here about what each parent had in terms of their total educational attainment. And then once you do that, you're done with this first quadrant. So a pretty simple quadrant. Provides good information for the university primarily, and also for some of our sister departments such as financial aid and admissions, but also information that might be relevant to your application. So while it might seem super straightforward and very simple, and for the most part it is important information to share accurately and truthfully to the best of your ability. So I hope that was helpful in completing the first quadrant of the application. In the next video, we will talk about how to fill out your academic history quadrant.